we are joined by another special guest that we have with us today, Nick Buckley, MBE, the social campaigner and author who's a freedom fighter and who's decided to get involved with politics a little bit as well. Welcome to the show, Nick. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. We've discussed certain things in the past together, but let's talk about what's going on in the country right now. Because firstly, for those of you watching right now, I am actually going to be joining Nick in Manchester. So let's quickly talk about that, and then we're going to be covering. I want to talk to you guys about what's going on in the country with obviously the social problems in the country, the cultural issues that is affected by mass migration and a lack of urgency from the political class to fix anything. Generally speaking, anything from the homelessness to poverty to knife crime on the streets and housing problems. And now we have local authorities pushing for certain net zero agenda. That's not really helping anybody. But let's go to Nick and see what we're actually doing in Manchester.
Yeah, so last year I wanted to organise some free speech events in Manchester because I'm sick and tired of me personally and other people having to travel to London to hear the people we want to hear, such as yourself, Calvin Robinson, Harry Miller. There's all these people who are doing fantastic work out there, getting their messages out there, but we've got to travel to London. It can be expensive, 150 quid train ticket, 250 for hotel. So let's bring people to Manchester. So obviously I spoke to you a month ago and you said, of course I'll come to Manchester. So you're going to be our third event.
Yep.
The Calvin Robinson one sold out, the Harry Miller one sold out, and we're on the way of almost selling out with yours. It's going to be Saturday afternoon, the 11th of March. The venue is going to be in the middle of Manchester city centre. And it's going to be a great event and people can come along, hear you at a small venue and be able to ask you questions because you can't do that on YouTube.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Saturday, the 11th of March. I'm going to put the link in the description. Yes. I said yes, mainly because I love Manchester. It's my second city. I went to Manchester for university and all that. It's nice. Every time I go to Manchester, it's nice to see partly it's actually improved. But then whilst it's improved, it's also affected certain areas that has been completely neglected, right? This applies to many other urbanized places in this country. And you're a social campaigner and you've been dealing with homelessness charities and everything else. What do you think? What's going on?
Many of our city centres now look fantastic compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago. And you look around and you think to yourself, wow, this looks like LA, this looks like New York. We all must be doing well. But we're not doing well. Who's doing well? The multinational millionaire investors from all over the world, from Dubai, from all over the world. They're doing well for Manchester city centre. You travel 1 or 2 miles outside, well, 1 mile outside the city centre, and you'll hit some of the poorest neighbourhoods in the country. And I've worked with those neighbourhoods for 2 decades, and I've spent that much time speaking to their kids going, there's jobs in the city centre for you. You know, if you're clever, there might be IT jobs. If you're not that clever, there may be cleaning jobs and bad jobs. But, you know, a legal job is still a legal job, and you should be proud to have a legal job.
Yeah.
And what they say to us is, and say to me over decades is, I don't belong in the city centre. So we're creating these hubs of wealth where normal people don't feel welcome there. And that's what we need to get over.
Not only, it's a different environment for certain people who are not used to it. But on the other hand, you might say, from the devil's advocate, from the more new liberal capitalist globalist side, saying, well, not just investment or jobs that are created when it comes to like Manchester city centre or like London, they at least these multinational companies and their foreign CEOs will be increasing the tax revenue for these local authorities. Yeah, at the same time, that is true. But what are these local authorities or the mayors in the cities are actually doing with that tax receipts? Because yes, they've increased their tax revenue, but they're not really improving the public services, really. They're also trying to find a new way to tax you, whether it's through the traffic measures, the low traffic neighborhoods, or the ultra low emission zones in London and Bristol. So what is also, obviously you mentioned one of the problems is a social problem when it comes to urban versus rural and suburban areas. But there's also a problem with the political structure, right? Because the authorities are not really doing anything.
Yeah. If we look at the people who are working in the city centre and making a fortune, I can't believe that started ringing. none of them live here. None of them live in the city of Manchester.
Right.
So they're not paying their council taxes to Manchester. The businesses who are based in the city centre will be contributing to some of the coffers somewhere. Of course they are.
Yeah.
And a couple of thousand will be living in the city centre.
Right.
So the tax revenue isn't that high. But then we look at our politics in, let's say, the city of Manchester. So we've got a Labour council in Manchester, always been a Labour council since I've been around, and that's been half a century. And we now have a Labour mayor. And we look around and we think, has anything improved? And the answer is no. And if you look at the role of mayor, and I may be standing again for mayor next year, I've not decided yet. But when you look at what the mayor does in Greater Manchester, the answer is hardly anything. They have no power. It's only the councils who have power. He's not in control. He's not in control of the councils. All the mayor in Greater Manchester has done is given 16, 17-year-olds cheap bus fare.
Yeah.
And he's reduced last year he reduced bus fare for everybody else. And when people go, that's fantastic. Well, look at your council tax bill. There's been an increase for your council tax bill, and that money is paying for other people to get cheap bus fares. So if you agree with that, fantastic. But look at homelessness in Manchester city centre. Yeah. We still have 100 people at least sleeping on the streets outside my apartment in the city centre within a couple of minutes walk away. 100 people. And the mayor of Greater Manchester promised to end that, to eradicate it in 3 years. It's been nearly 6. It's reduced a bit, but it's not gone by any means.
On the issue of obviously the whole country is changing the image of it and the face of it and everything else and the soul of the country when it comes to issues. I'm going to get into one of the problems, of course, the political system haven't been able to do anything about mass migration, and that applies to both illegal and legal. So I'm going to get to it in a second, but quickly on the issue of places that they've been controlled by one party for decades, regardless of which party. You know, I don't want to just be doing a Labour bashing sort of thing, but it usually happens to be Labour that is messing things up in local authorities. What is the psychology of certain constituencies or boroughs or counties that end up keep voting for the same party, and problems don't get fixed, and they keep voting the same party? Is it some sort of a media issue that people don't really understand the difference between local and national? So if things don't get fixed in their local areas, they just blame the national government.
I think it's slightly different to that. People who are fed up tend not to vote. Mm-hmm. So, the turnout in some of our neighbourhoods in Manchester at locals election is 18%. Yeah. So the vast majority of people that have given up on politics and given up voting because nothing ever changes. Yep. And then the one time they do vote, which is the Brexit, they then have 6-7 years of not getting what they said they would get when they voted that way. So people just give up. And they're the group of people that someone needs to come along and re-energize and say to these people, let's stick it to these career politicians. Yeah. Let's use your vote and everyone else's vote to stick it to these people who've been sticking it to you for decades.
Yeah, exactly. Because they've been let down by the establishment. And actually, you said the perfect way that the turnout is always low. So you have a small chunk of people who do vote on a tribal way. So if you have a small chunk of loud minority of, for example, Labour tribalist voters, if they just keep coming out to turn out to vote, then of course the Labour authorities or Andy Burnham will keep getting elected. The rest have been completely feeling pessimistic or let down, and someone needs to come and give them some sort of energy and motivation. But going back to the main problem, it's not just politics, it's also the cultural issues that is linked to governance of the country. Talking about mass migration, and then every time we would talk about it as an issue, there will be some woke liberals who say, well, you're bringing it up, so that means you hate people from other places. Not really. And it's not really a classist issue, because people say, well, you just hate the poor foreigners. Not necessarily, because you just talked about yourself, Nick, earlier about the rich Chinese or Arabs or Russians who come and buy all these skyscrapers in Manchester, and these are legal economic migrants. That's also a problem when there's also lack of integration from the rich economic migrants, because they just come, spend the money, take something and go away, right? Yeah.
And I think the big problem here is our politicians with short-termism. I can understand politicians going, let's encourage the Chinese to buy all this stuff in the UK. It'll do well for us over the next couple of years financially. I get that. Not one of them is thinking 20 years from now. No one's thinking of
Yeah.
integration. No one's thinking of community relations, because all they're thinking about is I need to be re-elected in 2, 3 years' time. And if I can get some extra money to spend because of these people, that'll look good for me. And that's because they're career politicians. What we
Yeah.
need is we need more statespeople. People who have a vision, a dream, a future for the country, and sell that to people by going, this is where I'm going to take you if you vote for me. And there's no changing, and I'm not flip-flopping, and I don't care what an opinion poll says next year. This is what I'm doing. And the day you don't like it, it's a day you vote me out.
Yeah.
We haven't got conviction politicians anymore now. We've just got flip-flops because it's easy for them to get elected next year.
Short-termism is
Yeah.
a huge problem, as you said, in the West in general, the Western democracies. But those who say, oh, it's a new problem, or more recent problem, because of the way the system works now. But technically, it's not the actual electoral system or things like that, because that hasn't changed. I think it's the expectation management that's kind of gone down. Whether it's obviously the fast-paced world of access to information, social media, and the way the media works, and the way the mob rule mentality works, that politicians feel pressured all the time, but not pressured to do the right thing, but pressured just to save their seats, because the system hasn't changed. Back in the day when Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher or even Attlee, those guys were doing things, they still had a few years, so they didn't have 20 years in their seats, but they didn't really focus on short-termism. So that's kind of a very, very good point that you mentioned. But in regards to when it comes to the issues that are affecting the country, it's not being solved. Obviously, you've been focusing a lot on poverty and homelessness and things like that. What is the latest outlook in the country? Because it's different in each nation, but we have homeless people who are illegal migrants. That's in a different category, because you can't really physically help them. They either have to be deported or give some sort of amnesty if you're liberal. But then you have obviously certain people who have addiction. You have some people who have mental health issues, and then you have some people who fall into short-term homelessness. Seems like there is no differentiation when it comes to politicians trying to come up with a solution, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the term homelessness covers everything. So let's say you're sleeping on your dad's settee in his house. You're technically homeless. Let's say you're a woman with kids and your boiler breaks down in your house.
Yeah.
You're now technically homeless.
If you're waiting in a waiting list to get a house, homeless.
Exactly. Living in a B&B, you're homeless. If you're living on the streets in a cardboard box, you're homeless. So they've grouped all these things together, which makes the problem look a lot bigger than it is. If we're looking at rough sleeping, there's several thousand people rough sleeping across the country. That's not a huge problem to fix. And if we're looking at them, and they should be priority because they're our fellow citizens living like rats in entries. So let's fix them first. And it's not about accommodation, really. It's about mental health support. It's about drug addiction. It's about finding out why they're so broken, because we're broken over decades, not just, you don't lose your job and end up on the streets. That doesn't happen. So let's begin to fix those people. Let's get some services around them. Let's move them into a place. Because what we tend to do is we'll find someone and we'll dump them in a one-bedroom flat somewhere. And we wonder why they fail. Because the walls close in around them and they go back on the streets to socialise.
But at the same time, do you not get frustrated? We reported on the channel yesterday that places like in Basildon, many other places, authorities are spending the residents' and taxpayers' money to millions of pounds to build new homes for migrants, illegal migrants, but not our homeless people. Isn't that just frustrating?
I don't know why the country is not more angry than it is, but things are beginning to change now. We've had some demonstrations and we're going to get a lot more of that. This incompetence we've had from several governments over decades was easy to accept when life was constantly getting better for everybody. We accepted the incompetence because my life was better than it was last year. But we've hit a stage now where, things aren't growing anymore. We're all becoming slightly poorer. There's a good chance we're going to become a lot poorer over the next decade, and we can't afford energy. As a tribal creature, once things start going in the wrong direction, we all become more tribal and we start looking who to blame. And we are going to blame the politicians. My worry is we'll start blaming other people as well. It's not their fault. It's not an immigrant's fault, illegal immigrant's fault, when they get here and we let them stay. It's not their fault. It's the government's fault for allowing them to stay. They should be deported day one, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always say, if we were unlucky to right now be in a country that is undeveloped or low developing. There will be a lot of us that would be urged to find any way to come to the developed world, but not to make excuses for those who commit a crime and cross the border. But you get desperate. So you're like, well, I just want a better life. I can't really do it in this country, in Albania or whatever. But it's a job of the developed countries not to allow them to come in the first place. And then when they come in, just support them. But there's a big problem, obviously, and we've been talking about this a lot. But going quickly to finish this, going back to the economic issue that is affecting the social problems. So, like Manchester City Centre with all the rich corporations. What football team do you support, if you do?
I'm a very small Manchester United supporter.
Perfect. So, like me. Now, as United fans, what is your view on the Qatari government about they're attempting to buy Manchester United? We're trying to get rid of the Glazer families, the Americans, and then they're coming to get it.
My answer might not be popular. Football supporters have brought these problems on themselves,
Right.
because a football supporter will sell their soul to the devil to have some rich person come in to buy the best players of the world.
Literally.
And when those rich owners really do not care about the history and the future of that club, football supporters then complain and turn on them.
As
But
usual.
you brought this upon yourselves
True.
by selling your souls for money.
Manchester City did that with the Arabs and the Newcastle and all the others. Although I mean I absolutely agree with you on this, and we don't want to come with a policy of too much protectionism, saying basically no foreign person involved with football in Premier League, because that means we can't even get the players. But I think there should be a line between having a foreign owner who doesn't know anything about football, like the Glazers. Yeah, it's still an issue. Than an actual person who's linked to a foreign government. That's the red line, isn't it?
Yeah, and then just look at the hypocrisy across the whole of football. Some of these clubs are owned by Middle Eastern princes who I mean, some of those countries are the most racist in the world. They have an underclass. You've got brown people dying building football stadiums, but yet in the UK, their teams are taking a knee. The hypocrisy is appalling, because let's be honest, football now is just about money, not for the supporters mainly, but for everybody else involved. It's only about money.
Yeah.
They've sold their souls.
It's for money, and also the left wing social groups like BLM. So, they're also happy to watch it, and that's actually the funny thing, because I can assure you, I know a few people in London who are a bit woke. The woke side, the liberal woke side, who are pushing the agenda for taking a knee on all this, they don't even watch football. So I'm not really sure why Premier League forcing the players to take a knee when they're not even watching it. Who are you pandering to? But that's a whole different problem anyway for another day. But I just want to say massive thank you to you, Nick, for coming on the show again. And guys, I'm going to put the link again. Because we're going to be, for those who obviously joined later, Nick, what are we doing? I'm coming to Manchester apparently on the 11th of March. Go.
You're coming to Manchester on Saturday afternoon, the 11th of March, right in the city centre. We've got a 2-hour event. The first hour will be you discussing whatever you think is important in politics. Then there'll be audience questions. And the second hour will be me interviewing you with the questions I want to ask you. And there'll be more chances then for the audience to speak to you and ask you questions, because it really is about getting the normal people who are your supporters, who like who follow YouTube, who watch you every day. I want them to be able to ask you some questions, because on YouTube you just can't do it.
Yeah, so we're gonna have an evening with a lot
Afternoon.
afternoon of a lot of normal people and Mahyar Tousi. So because I'm definitely not normal. But, if you listen to The Guardian. But no, thanks again, Nick Buckley, and everybody who joined this episode of our special interview. I'm Mahyar Tousi, and we are the media.